ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. The VVCA is delighted to be able to bring forward today's Great British Data Show presentation. It's a special day for VBCA as we celebrate our 1-year anniversary, and we could not think of a better way to party than with some excellent data in some excellent company. Before turning things over to our host, Jason Johnson, I do want to encourage you to use the Q&A feature in your Zoom app to ask questions. The panelists will be really focusing on their presentation and not monitoring the chat, but we've left ample time at the end of the presentation for a good, robust Q&A. I want to thank Robert Dawson, the whole Vet AI team, and YouGov for putting this together for our audience. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I will turn it over to Jason Johnson.
Thank you, Ali. This is extremely important day for the VVCA. This is, as Ali alluded to, our 1-year kind of anniversary, and I'm happy to be able to be a part of this this special day. And as a founding member of the VVCA, it's extremely special. So my name is Jason Johnson, and I was a private practice owner, kind of did different things around veterinary work in around 7 countries around the globe. In my last post, founded the 30th College of Veterinary Medicine in the United States. And it is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Robert Dawson today. Actually, Robert and I actually crossed paths, I think a couple of years ago in some speaking engagements. And I was extremely enamored with the work that they were doing then, and look forward to really he and his team sharing more with this group today on that. So when we think about high standards of care in the health of pets, we know US, Canada, and UK, we really resemble each other in those regards and what we do. And the data around that and the information that we can uncover and the ways that we can take better care of pets is extremely important to the VVCA and extremely important to Vet AI. What they have put together here is revolutionary. Most of the data that you see is a product of this deep and rich relationship that they put together with the University of Leeds and Robert's company. So as a previous founder and someone that led academia, I think there's ways of working and partnerships like this are really lessons on how we can all work together to elevate animal care around the globe. The group that Robert has put together and the programs and the way they're delivering this is just really leveraging AI and really taking us to next level understanding. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Robert as co-founder of Vet AI and ask him to introduce his team and take us into the real exciting meat of our time today.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Ali. And hi, everyone, and welcome to the Great British Data Show. So I got a little bit confused ahead of this, and I did put in a lot of prep, but unfortunately what I came up with was this rather than anything on data, but I'll do my best to fill in at short notice. So I'd like to introduce you to a couple of members of the Vet AI team, Samantha and Sheila. They work part of their time as telehealth excellence developers, and they're really tasked with trying to understand what is excellent and what is cutting edge in the area of veterinary telemedicine, and they're the ones who have collected a lot of the data that we'll be presenting later on. Sheila is our statistical wizard, I think, as we called her earlier on, and she is there really to answer questions at the end if there's anything around the methodology that we use to collect data. And Sam is going to be actually presenting much of the evidence to you later on during the talk. And I'd also like to welcome Eluan and Hannah from YouGov, who are going to give a little bit of background about YouGov and the data we collected from them. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to everybody who's joined us today. It's a huge privilege to be allowed to present to you, and we're really looking forward to it, looking forward to some robust questions at the end as well. Sam, are you okay to share the presentation? Okay, should we just go on to the first real slide? Okay, so we're going to be covering 5 sets of data, but really we're going to be concentrating on a report that we commissioned from YouGov, which was actually asking our customers what they wanted and how they felt about telemedicine. That's pet parents, and we'll be going through that first of all. And then the second major set of data that we'll be concentrating on is data we've collected over the last year around telemedicine, and in particular focusing in on our experiences with remote prescribing, which is a bit of a hot potato in the veterinary profession, I think, in the UK and certainly in the US as well. We're also going to go through very quickly a dermatology study that we did in 2018, which was just confirmation for us before we launched the service that actually what we were doing could be effective and safe. And then Sam's going to cover off a little bit around a happiness survey we did just for our own staff, and comparing really how they felt about veterinary medicine and how they felt about the support and the flexibility that we were able to give them, compared to some other surveys that have been done of the general profession, and how maybe this can benefit vets as well as pets and owners. And then finally, I'm going to go through another dermatology trial that we did at the end of last year, looking at how we could use a multimodal approach, a very structured way of delivering improved veterinary care for dogs with allergic skin disease. And I'm just going to highlight that with a couple of cases. I think that really helps to bring home what it really means and what we can really do to help using telemedicine effectively. Okay, great. But first of all, a little bit of background about VetAI and who we are. VetAI was conceived by Paul, myself, and Sarah back in 2017, in January 2017. And we wanted to be able to use a telemedicine service to collect data in a very structured way, in a very rich set of data, which could then be used to drive and train artificial intelligence tools that would then help us as a profession to deliver better veterinary care in the future. We're lucky enough to be based at Leeds University, and for those of you who don't know about Leeds University, which is probably all of you, it's one of the top UK universities. It's particularly strong in medicine and in artificial intelligence. It's ideal for us. So we're based in a brand new building there called the Nexus Hub, which hosts innovative local companies and connects them with the university departments and the academics within those to be able to share projects and to work on those together. And we have attracted UK government funding for 2 groundbreaking artificial intelligence projects, which we believe over the next 2 or 3 years will transform the way that we can deliver care to pets. And the other thing I just wanted to say about us is we are absolutely committed to evidence-based medicine. And I hope by the end of this talk, you'll see that we take it extremely seriously. We try to ignore opinion and to just focus on the actual evidence that we can get and the data sets that we're collecting to drive what we do. Thank you, Sam. So I'm just going to hand over now, before we go through the first set of data around the YouGov survey, to Eloanne and Hannah, who can talk a little bit about who YouGov are and the way that they go about collecting data. Over to you, Eloanne.
Thanks, Robert. It's great to be here. Thanks for letting us sort of be part of the presentation and giving a bit of an introduction into YouGov and some background into the methodology behind the pet parent research we conducted together. To give you a bit of an introduction, my name is Eloanne. I'm a client engagement manager here at YouGov. I've been here for over 4 years. And this is the first webinar I'm running alongside the panelists. I'm really excited to be here. In terms of a bit of a background into who YouGov are, we're an online global data and analytics company that have been going for just over 20 years now, founded in the UK by our CEO, Stefan Shakespeare. So all of our sort of research, we're sort of pioneers of online research, so moving away from sort of traditional paper and clipboard sort of survey collection to running everything online, which has led us to be in a place where we sit today with a panel of over 11 million panelists worldwide. Our UK is our strongest market. We've got about 1.7 million panelists here in the UK, but have been able to globally. We run, as you'll be able to see there, a lot of surveys every year. So across the world, run about 40 million plus surveys every year, collect a whole host of data around sort of consumer attitudes, how they feel towards everything from their traditional brands to who they're likely to vote for in the next elections, etc. So it allows us to collect and have a rich database and data set across a variety of different opinions and attitudes of what the world is doing, as per our little slogan at the bottom right, you'll see there. So if you want to move on to the next slide. The way in which we collect our data is twofold. So it's in a device agnostic way, which means that they can take it across a variety of different ways, which allows us for them to have a really sort of user-friendly experience with the way in which they're interacting and sharing their opinions. So whether that be completing surveys on their phones or through their desktops, we've actually seen quite a big shift over the years as to how our respondents answer our surveys, and now it's actually sort of more leaning on the positive side towards smartphones and tablets rather than desktops, which I'm sure you probably expect. It's really important that sort of the experience for our panelists is as streamlined as possible, just because we sit on so much amount of personal data on these respondents that every single data point we hold on them is extremely valuable, and we go to extreme lengths to make sure that that's protected and that they feel trusted, and that it's also a simple, fun and informative way for our panelists to share their opinions across a variety of topics. Next slide, please. And that sort of bringing that experience, that positive experience to our panelists allows us to really get some better data and insights, and sort of almost having it as a community rather than in a sort of one-way experience. So it's designed to be a two-way participation and engagement. The way in which we sort of position ourselves as YouGov, so it's essentially putting the panelists at the forefront of everything that we do and sort of enabling them and giving that empowerment to them, that they're having their opinions heard. We're the most quoted research agency here in the UK. So if a panelist fills out a survey about what they had for what their favorite chocolate bar is, and they see that in the paper the next day, it's easy for them to say, oh, it was, I did that survey yesterday. And it's that sense of empowerment that they really feel part of sort of driving decisions in businesses and society as a whole as well. Our panelists tend to provide sort of more thoughtful responses, and they tend to take a lot more time and care and be a lot more honest and realistic in their responses. A lot of our surveys don't go beyond 16 minutes to ensure that the panel experience is as friendly as possible, which enables, and brings that trust together, that we really are sort of looking after them to make sure we're getting as rich data as possible. And next slide, please. And that's led us to be in a really fortunate place where we are sort of industry leaders in sort of reliability in the data. So as you'll see from those two sort of examples there, sort of very reputable sources quoting us as the most accurate research agency out there. We've had a lot of success in predicting elections, for example, and being sort of reputable there and trusted. And we work with some of the biggest media outlets to sort of bring what consumers and our panelists are really thinking about the world's biggest issues. And have been driving that reliability over the 20 years. So that was a very whistle-stop tour in terms of who we are. I think the next section is on the actual research that we conducted for Vet AI. So I hand it back to Robert and the team on that front.
Thank you so much, Eluan. Certainly I can confirm in the UK at least, YouGov are definitely considered the UK's leading market research company. There's no doubt about that. That's the one that you want to be listening to. So the actual survey that we commissioned back in at the back end of last year, we got the results of in December, was to look at almost 2,000 British dog and cat owners and to find out what they thought. I mean, at the end of the day, they're our customers, and we are strong believers that technology does not drive change. It enables it. It's actually what the customer wants that will always drive the change. And if the customers want something and we don't give it to them, they'll find some other way of accessing what they want. Okay, Sam. So we'll really it's quite a detailed survey, and we'll make this freely available to anybody who would like to have a copy of it through Ali, if you're one of those detailed people and you like to sort of really get into the nitty gritty. But every answer is broken down by all the normal demographics, and there are more categories than we've actually shown on here. But what we really want to do is just pick out the really important points. And the first thing we asked about is how were they finding their bricks and mortar practices, the traditional veterinary practices? And the answer was they're very, very positive about it. With the one caveat there is a reasonable level of concern about value for money and the cost of veterinary care in a traditional bricks and mortar practice, where over 30% of respondents said that they were unsatisfied with that. Apart from that, I think the level of care they're getting is really good in the UK, and I'm sure it's very similar in the US and Canada. So then we started to ask some more questions there about whether they would like to be able to access remote care. And this, through these three graphs, show that they're far more likely to want to access a remote service if the remote service can prescribe medication, both prescription medication and non-prescription medication. If they can do that, they've seen much more value in it. And I think it's going to be a really important thing going forwards for us, all of us who are looking to be able to offer effective remote consults, to be able to prescribe medication going forwards. And it should be a focus that we work on. Okay, Sam. And then we asked some sort of quite specific questions. You can see the answers to all of these questions. The blue line there is people who are likely to want to use the service, and the red one is people who are unlikely to, and then the green is those people who didn't know. And you can see with all of these questions, it was overwhelmingly positive, the responses. Some of them getting up to 80% of the respondents saying that they would use the service. And I will just go through these individually because I think they're quite important. Certainly having home delivery of medications was a big driver for people wanting to use the service, as was not having to leave the home, and also particularly not having to stress their pet out. And I think we can all recognise that, all of us who are vets, that is quite an important thing for pet owners. Being able to access care out of hours 24/7 was also a big driver, particularly if that didn't involve an increased cost. And also being able to get instant or very quick access to care just when they needed it was very important. And the final thing was that cost was an issue for the UK respondents, and they were much more likely to use it if it was going to be cheaper. And underlying this, if you look at the demographics, particularly by age, you'll see a pattern. If you go into the detail of it, the younger the respondents were, the more likely they were to engage with a remote service. So I think this is going to be something that goes forward and becomes more and more sought for by pet owners as the tech savvy younger people start to actually become pet owners or pet parents. The only difference in that, the only exception to that, was when you asked about cost, where the younger generations really weren't so concerned about costs. It was more something that the older generations were concerned about. And I think that demonstrates the changing way that people feel about their pets. And the younger generation, they really are part of their family and extremely important to them, which is great news for the veterinary profession, but we need to make sure we harness that. So there's just a couple more points I wanted to make about the survey. This one was a key finding, really, that of all the people who replied, 80% said that they felt that pet owners and pet parents should be able to access veterinary care remotely if they want to, including getting hold of medications the same way that they can from their doctors at the moment. And only 8% said that they didn't. So 10 times more pet parents want to be able to have access to care than don't want to. And then there's just a couple of other things there. But one worrying thing that did come out was a quarter of all the respondents admitted to having avoided taking their pet to a vet at some point in the last 2 years. And over 25% of those that did that said that was because of out of worry of cost. And I just thought that was quite a high figure, particularly seeing that it's one of those questions that people might not be quite so honest about. So I think probably it will be likely to be higher than a quarter of people have avoided taking their pet to the vet, even when they know that they're ill. And it says to me they're already finding alternative ways of getting advice and care outside of the veterinary profession. And I don't think that's good for them, for the profession, or for pets. And I think we can just move on from that. No, I don't think there's anything else I want to say. So now I'm going to pass. Oh, no, I won't. I've got to talk about the Dermatology Trial we did in 2018 first. Next slide. So this is something we did in 2018, roughly a year before we launched any service. We wanted to understand whether we could actually effectively diagnose cases. And we looked at dermatology because that's the most visual of all diseases. And we felt would be the one that was, if we couldn't diagnose dermatology, we probably shouldn't be trying to diagnose anything online. So we recruited 3 recognized European specialists in veterinary dermatology, and each of them uploaded 10 cases into a special platform that we had built specifically for this. And the information they uploaded were images of the pets and also basic signalment data and data that they got from the history from the pet owner. Nothing about any kind of examination that they did was entered into that. They also were asked to enter their top up to 3 differential diagnoses that they made in clinic before they did any further testing, in order of which ones they felt were most likely. And then the other 2 dermatologists then reviewed these cases and put their top 3 differential diagnoses in as well. And then we statistically analysed this, and there was almost perfect correlation between the diagnoses, both the differential diagnosis list and the top diagnosis, between the in practice diagnoses made and those made remotely. So this was really strong evidence to support that at least dermatology was extremely suitable for remote diagnosis. Next slide, please. So we produced a paper on this. It hasn't been published in any veterinary publications yet, but we did have an abstract from that accepted by the BSAVA for the last year's BSAVA Congress. Unfortunately, that was cancelled because of COVID, like everything else over the last year. And so we haven't actually presented that yet, but if anybody wants to have the paper again, Ali will be able to provide that to them. If they would like to have it, we'll make it freely available. We've shared this with the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, our own governing body over here. Okay, we can skip that. Okay, now I'm going to pass over to Sam, who's going to go through the data that we collected over the last year whilst we were able to prescribe during COVID.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, so we've already demonstrated that there is an interest from pet parents to access remote services. So as a technology-based veterinary company, we are interested in gathering the data about what they want to see us for and what we can actually treat and help those parents with. It's probably worth me explaining that the UK veterinary sector do not have a VCPR per se, and a veterinary client-patient relationship, but we do have the concept of undercare, which is a little bit more of a nebulous term, but does involve the provision of a 24/7 emergency provision of veterinary care and pain relief if needed. This was subject to review by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons in 2019 with the emergence of telemedicine platforms and a little bit of debate about how they could potentially remotely prescribe going forward. So this was already under review when COVID hit. So you can see a little bit of a timeline here, which is showing, so March 24th last year, the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons relaxed their guidance as we went into our first lockdown here in the UK to allow us to actually remotely prescribe without an in-person exam. Most practices at that time were only seeing real emergencies, so there were a lot of cases that needed that help remotely. And that was extended on a regular basis throughout the year, and a survey was performed by the RCVS during that period, which essentially came back saying that remote prescribing was causing no harm, and there were no particular side effects or concerns with that. There have been further amendments throughout the year, and as of March this year, that has become a situation where remote prescribing is really when no suitable alternative exists. So VetAI and Joy are no longer prescribing remotely, but we did from the 2nd of April last year until March 3rd this year. And during that time, we undertook 38,449 veterinary consultations. So I will show you some data about that time, about what we've seen and what we have treated. So it's worth noting that when we saw the changes coming and the prescribing becoming remote, that we worked very agilely to respond to the situation and set ourselves up to be in a good position to help our clients with this. So we set in place lots of policy to define what drugs we thought were appropriate to prescribe remotely, what conditions we thought we could help and sufficiently support remotely there, and how long we should be prescribing for. So should this be a week, a month, 6 months for any given condition or medication. We defined when our vets could prescribe with or without a clinical history from the pet's bricks and mortar local practice. So in every case where we have prescribed a medication, we will not only send a Joy history to the local practice so they know what we have seen with that pet. We work alongside a patient's registered local practice rather than providing one ourselves. And we also request a history so that our history is full. In cases where we were potentially treating patients with chronic conditions, we would do that in advance. In acute situations, for example, acute lamenesses, we'd do that after where pain relief maybe wasn't appropriate to be delayed. Knowing that antimicrobial resistance is a fairly big topic concerning remote prescribing, we put in place some very strict protocols around the use of antimicrobials and have audited that pretty much ongoing throughout the whole of our prescribing period. We submitted all of this policy and procedure to the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons before setting up our pharmacy and beginning to prescribe, and had no negative feedback at the time. So as a tech company, we were already quite keen on seeing the data we could collect and seeing exactly what patients were walking through our doors. So we were already set up in advance of seeing these clients to be able to record a lot of bits of information. We use the veterinary nomenclature, which is something that the Royal Veterinary College in London have produced based on human medicine terminology to record the presenting problem for every patient that comes through our remote door. To record all of the symptoms that they are displaying, and also all of the differential diagnoses that we consider for each of these cases. We also record the outcome for every single consultation that we see. So as you can see there, that means that we can determine if we're directing to other services we provide. So we have, for example, nurses who provide preventative care clinics, if we're recommending products or lab tests, if we're directing to a local vet, an in-person vet, is that an emergency or is that something fairly routine? So of those 38,000 consultations, this is the breakdown of what came through our door and what the outcome was for that. We were basically determined that over 80% of the consults we were seeing were manageable by remote means to some extent. So the follow-up appointments here, nearly a third of our cases had a follow-up with our remote team. 1 in 4 cases we would recommend some form of product. That might not necessarily be a prescription medication. We do work with a wholesaler to provide nutraceuticals, diets, etc. as well. And 12% we deemed as not actually needing any veterinary care at that time. Just over 3%, the lime wedge at the top, the little one there, were lab tests. So we work with a laboratory to be able to provide appropriate testing direct to owners' doors. And only 4% were emergencies there. And you can see just under 18% were directed to a vet as a routine matter. So of the 25% of consults that did require a medication, I've just got a little breakdown here of what were prescription medications and what weren't. So roughly 50-50 prescription medications versus others. So that resulted in 5,405 prescription medications being provided in just under 5,000 consultations for our patients. So this is just a little breakdown of what the presenting problems were for our consultations, and then also a breakdown of those presenting problems for those consults that resulted in prescribing. The graph on the left there shows the presentation of our patients for the whole 38,000 consultations there. So the top three categories, we have dermatological problems, so a lot of skin cases. We have gastrointestinal cases, which I'm sure we all know regularly come through the door of any veterinary practice. And we do have non-specific there. So essentially these are clients, I can give a breakdown of the codes, but these are clients that are coming looking for preventative treatments, generally flea and worming treatments, rather than coming to us with a problem per se. And if you look at the bar chart on the right, it's good to see that the dermatology cases correlate quite highly as those we could prescribe for and treat. Again, we were prescribing for a lot of those non-specific preventative cases, and the gastrointestinal cases were actually very low there, so not using prescription medication, which is a good thing to see. So over 80% of the cases we did prescribe for were either dermatological, parasites and non-specific treatment, musculoskeletal and ophthalmic cases, so usually quite low risk cases. This is a bit of a breakdown of the medications that we did dispense, just put into some general categories here. So nearly a third of the medications were parasiticides, so preventative rather than treatment. We've got just around 30% there that were some form of antimicrobial, but it's good to see that the topical antimicrobials are twice as high there as the oral antibiotics, a large number of antipyretic medications, and then various forms of pain relief make out the bulk of the rest. I've already mentioned that we were pretty strict on our antimicrobial usage, and it was one of the main concerns raised by the RCVS with the potential of remote prescribing. So nearly all of our cases involve the use of first-line antibiotics, and working with a laboratory, we are able to provide culture and sensitivity for clients in the cases where we used non-first-line antibiotics. Overall, around 30% of our prescribing contained an antibiotic, but that worked out with our total caseload to be roughly 4% of our overall veterinary consultations. Now, the last study in the UK in 2017 of antimicrobial use in general practice showed somewhere between 12 and 17% of cases were walking out the door with an antimicrobial of some description, predominantly oral. So it's good to see that we've been very judicious with this. This is a bit of a breakdown of the outcomes. So for every patient that we saw and did prescribe, we ensured that they were booked in for a follow-up consultation with ourselves so that we could see not only that our clinicians were happy with the resolution based on their treatment, also that the clients were happy and that the pet was clinically well. For any case where a client didn't attend that follow-up, we would follow up by email to ask the question and find out how that pet was doing and try and encourage them to come back through our service so we could visualize for ourselves. We managed to follow up with 2/3 of our clients. 33% were unfortunately lost to follow-up. It happens in practice too. And you can see a bit of a breakdown there. So the majority of our cases we deemed as either completely resolved. These were acute cases such as acute lamenesses or acute infections, wounds, etc. And then the yellow bar there is the expected response to treatment. So these were often chronic cases, atopic dogs, osteoarthritic pets, where we wouldn't expect exactly a resolution, but we'd expect to be keeping them at an acceptable level of comfort and management. So we had roughly 5% of our follow-ups resulted in some partial resolution, the orange bar here, where we then had to refer these clients into a bricks and mortar practice to follow up due to our inability to get enough data remotely. And roughly 4% did not respond to our treatment at all, and again were sent with a history to their local vet for in-person care. And then the blue bar is just a small number of adverse events, which made up for roughly 1.2% of all of our cases. We followed up on every single one of these adverse reactions, all of which were deemed mild. As you can see here, again, roughly 80% of these involved some form of vomiting or diarrhea. We had 2 cases of lethargy and 1 we've deemed unknown there. That person, we're still following up with the client to find out exactly what went on. Overall, this was 44 cases out of 38,000. And just a breakdown of what we found that the clients and the patients were reacting to. So 1/3 of our reactions happened with parasiticides, and 1/3 with non-steroidals, which we all know there's a little bit of a risk there in practice or remotely that you'll get an upset stomach. So in all cases of these adverse events, we audited the records that we had on file, and we deemed that the medications were used appropriately by our staff, that they were given at the correct dose, and that a physical exam was highly unlikely to have changed the outcome. We thoroughly monitored and followed up on all of these patients until these adverse reactions were resolved. And in fact, the clinical signs that they'd first come to us for were all resolved as well. And we reported all of these adverse events to the Veterinary Medicine Directorate, which is the UK government department for regulating veterinary medicines. And in any situation where we felt that maybe we needed to alter the medications we were suggesting through our team, we would just alter our policy and adjust that. So that's a little bit of data around how we think we've been able to help patients and clients, but it's quite close to our heart as a company that we also want to help vets. The British Veterinary Association produced a survey last year in October of 2020, during the pandemic, where 74% of the vets that were surveyed said they were very or quite concerned about stress and burnout in the profession. And just over 2/3 of vets were concerned about stress and burnout in their colleagues. Now, we know this isn't a new thing. We work very closely at VetAI with VetLife, who are a UK veterinary charity specifically designed to support vets with their mental health and well-being. And they have told us that vets are 3 to 4 times more likely than the general population to die by suicide. And this was before the pandemic, which has just compounded everything. And I know that things are unlikely to be very different in other countries. This isn't just a UK problem. A lot of the factors that are reported to contribute to this high level of suicide and mental health concern includes the long hours, poor work-life balance, a lack of support in your job role, and high client and job demands. So it's very important to us that hopefully we've been able to increase flexibility and reduce the stress and burden on some of our veterinary professionals. So what we have done is put out surveys to the team to see if this is actually something that we've managed to achieve. So the first graph here shows the overall mood of our clinical team at work. And as you can see, 80% of our staff are saying that they are either happy or very happy at work, which is something that is really good for us to hear. And this bottom statistic is very close to our hearts. So has VetAI improved your mental health in comparison to working for other employers? You can see 2/3 of our team have said yes, sir. Do you feel valued as a team member? 98% of our team say yes. Do you feel well supported with your health and well-being at work? 95% of our team say yes. And as you can see, 92% of our team have reported that flexible work conditions, including hour and location, are highly valuable to them. So when you compare those statistics to the general vet population in the UK, where 75% of the general population are concerned about stress and burnout, I like to think that shows that we are working hard to improve that situation. And that telemedicine integrated into the general veterinary model might help to improve our retention and reduce the stress levels on the profession as a whole. There are some little red wedges there where people have said no, and we're going to continually resurvey and work harder to make sure that that is a 100% yes on all of these questions in the future. So I'm going to pass back over to Robert now, who's going to go through a dermatology trial that we ran last year and go through some fantastic pictures that show how well we can support pets.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam. So this is the final section that we're going to go through. I'll try and do it quite briefly to make sure there's plenty of time if anybody wants to ask questions at the end. The dermatology trial we conducted last year, we did in partnership with an insurance company. We identified 100 dogs that had multiple claims made for allergic skin disease. And we looked to recruit 100 of those into a trial where we applied a very structured multimodal approach to managing their allergic skin disease. And this is a really complicated looking diagram, but it's actually a very simple thing for vets to follow once they get their heads around it. You can see there's a yellow, red, blue, and so on boxes about sort of 3 or 4 lines down. That's the multimodal approach. So it's managing skin barrier, managing the underlying itch, giving good quality ectoparasite control, controlling secondary infection, avoiding allergens, and then using immunotherapy to manage cases. And all of these, or some of them, can be applied in each case. And what we've done there is made it so that any parts of the skin barrier, for instance, can be instantly accessed by clicking on a box. It will bring up the appropriate information that can be passed on to the owner, but also it means that the vet can just see exactly what it is that they should be doing with that particular case. And this was the outcome of the trial. So of the 100 dogs that initially signed up, some never came in and some dropped out, but 58 of the dogs completed the 3-month trial. And almost 90% of them were deemed to have shown some level of improvement by a combination of what the owner and the vet managing the case considered. And you can see on the right-hand side there, it's slightly lower when you just ask owners the outcome. And that's primarily because the owners have to come into an algorithm to go through and say what the outcome is. And a couple of them decided to just skip through it by just clicking skip, 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 and they didn't actually enter the right data. So that was a little bit higher than that. But you can see there, some of them there have completely cleared up. A lot of them have been significantly improved or shown really good improvement. And I think these are all cases that were under care. These are all cases where we worked with the existing veterinary practice very closely. A lot of them we referred in for things like cytopoint injections. And by being able to communicate with them in a slightly different way, by them always having access to their treatment plans and the information we were able to give to them, we just managed to get better compliance with the vet's recommended treatment plan. And I think that's primarily why we saw such a good improvement. But this was pretty staggering for us. We weren't expecting it to be quite so effective as it was. It's something we would like to roll out more. We're conscious that we need to work alongside existing veterinary practices to manage this. And it's something we're building up now. We have agreements in place with a number of veterinary practices across the UK so that we can work closely with them to help manage these kind of chronic skin diseases. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few real life cases because I just think it really helps just to see some of the impact that we've had. So this is Franky. He's a 3-year-old Staffordshire Bull Terrier. His owner, or his mum, was heavily pregnant at the start of the COVID lockdown, the first COVID lockdown in the UK. And you can see that little baby coat behind there, which sort of says what's going to happen. So the mum was shielding at the time. It was more difficult for her to access care. And Franky's skin was pretty appalling at this time. She ended up having a premature baby, and she had to carry on shielding through much of COVID. And we provided an absolute lifeline for her. So I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures of what he looked like. He was primarily affected in his feet and his head and his ears. But this is what his feet looked like at first presentation. He was started on a complete parasite control. He was given topical antimicrobial, so he didn't have any antibiotics. He had shampoos and mousses put on there, and he was put on to Apoquel, as well as starting a food trial and then the other stuff that should go alongside this in the multimodal approach. And in 2 weeks, this is what his feet look like. So a massive improvement, and obviously his quality of life was hugely improved by starting that treatment. And similarly, if we have a look at what his ears look like, he was scratching his ears really badly, and it got secondary infection on the outside of the ears and also inside the ears. We sent out swabs, which were under veterinary direction. The owner took swabs where we got culture and sensitivity on him. We were able to direct topical treatment again for these ears, and in 2 weeks' time, again, almost completely resolved. So that's a case there which would have been difficult for the owner to get into practice, and probably dangerous at that point for her to try and do that. Next slide, please. This is our second case. I do like this one because of the last photo that you'll see in a moment. This is Tommy. He's a 4-year-old cat who, again, has allergic skin disease. He was intractably itchy. He couldn't sleep. He was losing weight. He'd been on Depomed injections of steroid for a long period of time, which initially he'd responded well to, but after a while he wasn't. So the doses increased. The typical side effects that you can predict that go with that had started to show with him as well. And if we just show a couple more of you can see there what he's doing to himself. He's just ripping his fur out and scratching his skin with his rough tongue. And I think there's one more picture of him before he's, yeah, and that's what he was doing all the time. Okay. And that's what he looked like after 6 weeks of treatment. He started on oral cyclosporin alongside a flea control and a food allergy trial. And in 6 weeks, his life was transformed. I just think the look on his face there, the contentment, it always makes me just feel very proud that we're able to help pets to that extent. Again, Tommy's owner had cystic fibrosis and was completely unsafe to go out at any point during COVID-19 when it was at its worst, and it was a lifeline. So this is the final case, and the owners of Kajek, this dog, a 6-year-old German Shepherd, didn't need to shield for any reason, but the vets did need to be shielded from Kajek because he hates them, and you cannot get near him in a clinic. He'll just take your hand off if you tried. So to thoroughly examine him in a clinic would be extremely difficult, but the appearance and the signalment behind this means that this is pretty much pathognomic of a disease called discoid lupus erythematosus. And you don't really need to do biopsies or anything on this. You can do a trial treatment. So he was started on an ointment called tacrolimus. Tacrolimus is just a topical ointment. He wasn't started on anything else at all. And in 6 weeks, this is what his nose looked like, almost completely resolved at that point, and delighted owners again. And again, we just made a massive difference to a dog who would have been tricky to treat, regardless of whether we were in lockdown or COVID, just because of his hatred of vets. Okay, so in summary, I mean, I think what we would like to try and sort of think we're demonstrating there is, one, this is good for pet owners. They want to have access to remote veterinary care, and as a profession, we need to engage with them and provide them with that, because otherwise they are very likely to go off and try and find care in a different way, and that might be Dr. Google or a chat group or non-veterinary services that are springing up out there all the time. Certainly the pets can benefit from it. It's less stressful for them. They probably can have more frequent touch points with the vet team. And I think it's really good for vets as well. If any of you out there who are business owners, recruiting and retaining vets, it's a real challenge. And being able to offer them some kind of flexibility through having maybe some remote working alongside a traditional vet practice job may be a way to really improve the quality of their work-life balance as well. And the final point before I shut up is that where we want to go from here really is, okay, we're one company, we've tried to collect as much data as we can. It would hold 1,000 times more weight if we can combine that with data from lots of other people who are providing telemedicine and have experience of it, including prescribing, which I believe has been allowed in lots of different cases, in lots of different states in the US during lockdown, very similar to the UK environment. And to be able to correlate that data and have a central data bank. And to that effect, of the VVCA has set up a new committee to look at a data collection strategy, which Ali, again, can be contacted on to find out how you can all help to provide the data that we need to understand where remote care can be effective and where it can be provided safely, and just as importantly, where it can't. And that's it from me. So thank you all very much for listening, and very happy now for us to take some questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Robert and team. Just extremely informative, and layer upon layer upon layer of rich information. Got a couple of few questions that came in. And so we'll pick a few here that kind of put together some central themes. One is that it was really interesting to see what pet parents think about telemedicine. Has Vet AI looked at or thought about or have any data on how the veterinarians kind of see the topic? And maybe you can couple with that. It was alluded to that there were some wellness factors from the veterinary perspective that maybe this helped with some workload things and balance. So any information on what veterinarians think about the topic?
There is a wealth of information, not that we've collected ourselves. We really haven't had to do that. During lockdown, the RCVS employed a company to do a survey of the profession. And they did that at multiple points throughout the COVID situation, and it was looking for exactly that. So there are hundreds of thousands of replies and pieces of data that have been collected about the veterinary perspective. And the other thing that's happening, and should have happened, but it's been delayed because of COVID again, is there is a review going on of Under the Care, which is largely around looking at what the situation should be going forward with remote prescribing in particular. And that is going to be largely an opinion gathering exercise from the profession, both vets and vet nurses in the UK. I think you call them technicians in the US. But that's primarily going to be around veterinary opinion. So we don't feel that we need to collect any more data around that.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you. There was an interesting question that came up. Obviously, there's opportunities and could be some valuable information gathered through photos and diagnostics around dermatology. And we don't reveal all of your proprietary plans and everything you're doing, but very thought-provoking idea around the concept of taking some of that and using either videos or images to do some 3D modeling and then further applying different AI technologies on top of that. Any thoughts or wisdom to share there, Robert?
Yes, I mean, yeah, we're very happy to sort of give a top level of what we are doing at Leeds University. So, yeah, part of one of the projects that's been funded by the UK government is looking to start off with just at dermatology, but it will be expanded out to every other field. Is just collecting all the data points, including images and video clips, and using that to be able to predict what the most likely disease processes going on are, but also to be able to predict from what we know what those pets are likely to get later on and what can be done to prevent them. So it's a really quite a big piece. It's a thing called a causal inference model that will be being produced, and it's being done by an absolutely top person in causal inference, which is a fairly new field in artificial intelligence. And he's a member of the Alan Turing Institute and one of the world-renowned people in that. Part of that is putting together, we've almost completed it actually, is training a model that will recognize skin disease. That should be up and running and in the app by the end of the year. And our second project there is looking at automated, pretty much what, I think it was Edward, wasn't it, who put the question in around this 3D modeling, and we are doing that. We're doing that on video clips, and that's primarily going to be around identifying pain and lameness in dogs, cats, and horses.
That's great. There was a couple of questions around dissatisfaction or kind of detractors from the model, that you've deployed, and really just kind of a real season there of rich engagement that you were able to enjoy. And so kind of in the realm of dissatisfiers or detractors, kind of what did you hear, Robert, from licensed and body colleges, local veterinarians, and how do you kind of deal with that? And how do you guys as a team kind of approach those moments? There was quite a few questions kind of wrapped around that. There's conversations going on in every country, multiple countries represented on this call. And so as a leader, I think the group would love to hear some thoughts around that from you.
Yeah, it's it's a very hot topic, and I think some of the sentiment might be driven more by concern about change and that it might possibly become a threat to traditional existing practices. I mean, I really don't believe that's the case. I just think we need to engage as early on as we possibly can with pet owners, and we will pick up the cases then that need to go into practice, and then we can deal with a lot of the cases that are chronic cases, low risk problems remotely, and leave the high value work to go into practice. So our view has always been we would just like to work with veterinary practices, and we've done that pretty successfully in the UK. In most cases, we get the occasional practice owner who doesn't like what we're doing, and generally what we just do with any owner that's caught in between there is just say, just go back and see your practice and don't use our service, because you need to maintain that relationship with them. But I mean, on the whole, most vets seem to welcome it. When we work very closely with practices doing the dermatology trial that we committed, we only had one vet who objected in any way to what we were doing in that trial, and we created an awful lot of work for veterinary practices because we were providing referral level advice and care, and that involves more work and more workups. And so I think we don't see that we are part of the veterinary profession. We're not part of a separate thing, and we want to work really closely with veterinary practices, and we would love to try and do that with veterinary practices in the US and Canada and in the UK and anywhere else in the world where we can work together.
Yeah, thanks for that. There was a question that came through around, I think in the pie chart that Sam was sharing around kind of solved virtually. And there was some questions around maybe just to unpack that just a little bit, and kind of what did a virtual follow-up kind of look like, and when it means it was solved virtually, some questions around did that happen in the postscript of the second visit? So maybe just a little bit of information there to share with the group.
Yeah, well, I'll pass over to Sheila there. I think she's the sort of the statistical mastermind behind everything that we did there, and the methodology that we used.
Yeah, so any follow-up consultation, just like your first consultation, a video exam with uploaded photos and a kind of face-to-face chat with the owner and examination of the pet on the video platform to determine, are the symptoms resolved? So everything would be followed up, and we would only mark something as resolved if the symptoms had resolved, obviously, and another follow-up would be made if the symptoms hadn't resolved or needed ongoing or different medication. So yeah, consultation, just like the first, just like you would do in normal practice. You'd be looking in ears, or you'd be looking at the skin to check to see if everything's fine and that the owner's happy that things have resolved, and the pet is happy that things have resolved too.
Thank you. That's great. Ali, I know we're, if I remember correctly, we're kind of coming up on time. There's still questions that I see kind of rolling in and everything. So some of the questions I think could be answered through sharing of some of the information that you'll have access to. So I want to pass it off to you in the spirit of keeping everyone on time. And I just want to thank Robert and the whole team for an absolutely insightful and wonderful session together.
Well, thank you all so much. I've been watching some of the questions that come through, and it is a very, very top level look at the data that we've had, because we were trying to squeeze it into a 45 minute talk. And so there is data behind that. There is a lot of detail behind that. And again, we're really happy to share all of this. We just feel that the data we collect, we should be sharing with one another. And it really is to understand how we can deliver the best service to our customers, full stop. It's not about trying to force people into doing something where it's not effective. It's understanding where it can be effective and where it can't, and directing people to the right kind of veterinary care. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure
And I will be sure to turn this around as soon as I can and get an on-demand recording available for everyone, including the downloadable materials that Robert has shared. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, ali@vvca.org. There are a lot of questions coming in, a lot of thank yous to the team. So cheers to everyone. I will see if I can concatenate some of these questions that we didn't get to and make sure that we get some answers shared publicly so everyone can see the Q&As that we didn't get to. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.